From that scared kid with a bad bowl cut to becoming a superpowered being, Will's glow up in Stranger Things is wild. Just when you think his journey can't get any crazier, the story throws in a few dark twists that change everything. Long before he got powers and became Vecna's own toy, Will was a really sweet kid. Born in 1971 to Joyce and mean old Lonnie Byers, Will was the younger brother to Jonathan, and from day one, he was always different. Not supernaturally different, just different enough to make his father uncomfortable. Lonnie Byers made sure his son understood just how weak he was. He casually called Will queer for liking art instead of sports and for being quiet instead of loud and manly, like him. This made young Will start to build walls and hide himself. He became the kid who gave away his truck but never asked for anything back. When Joyce finally kicked Lonnie out, Jonathan became the father figure Will desperately needed. He introduced Will to music, creating a mixtape that included Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash, a song that would later become Will's lifeline in the Upside Down. Jonathan taught him it was okay to be different, that being artistic and sensitive wasn't a flaw. The brothers built Castle Byers together in the pouring rain, hammering nails badly, getting sick for a week afterward, but creating a sanctuary that belonged to them alone. Castle Byers was the one place Will could exist without judgment, without having to perform masculinity or pretend he fit in. It represented everything he couldn't have in the real world: safety, acceptance, the freedom to just be. The fact that he built it with Jonathan in the rain shows how desperately he needed that space. School brought Mike Wheeler into Will's orbit. 1976, kindergarten, Will sitting alone. Mike walked up and asked, "Do you want to be my friend?" Will said yes. This was what created the party. Later came Lucas Sinclair, then Dustin Henderson in 4th grade, and suddenly Will had a family beyond blood. They played Dungeons & Dragons in Mike's basement, and Will discovered he could play the wise one. In that game, being sensitive became an asset, and being different meant being special. Now, Will's artistic side flourished within the group. For his 8th birthday, he got 120 crayons and drew a rainbow ship that Joyce showed everyone at work, sorta embarrassing him, but he loved that his art mattered. He sketched constantly and processed the world through color and lines. This became a new way he could express his emotions, and it was really beautiful. But here's a twist. The Duffer Brothers didn't waste the descriptor sensitive child. Henry Creel's father used those exact words about him. Both Will and Henry were artistic, misunderstood, and targeted by the Mind Flayer at young ages. Henry became Vecna, and chose Will deliberately because he recognized something familiar, something he could easily exploit. And don't forget, it all started on that night in 1983, November 6th, 1983. This was the night Will Byers became a ghost story. The party gathered in Mike's basement for their usual marathon D&D session. Later, while racing Dustin home through Mirkwood for a comic book, Will's bike light flickered. Something strange appeared on the road. Will crashed his bike and immediately ran home. The house sat empty. Chester the dog barked frantically at the shed. Will grabbed the rifle, but his hands were so shaking that he could barely load it. Just when he turned, the monster was behind him. The light bulb exploded, and when we looked again, Will had vanished. But no, he didn't die. Instead, he got pulled into the Upside Down. This was a toxic replica of Hawkins, with every surface decayed and creatures we call Demogorgon, hunting with senses beyond human comprehension. Anyone who got dragged into this place lasted just a few hours. Will, however, survived 7 days. Now this wasn't a dumb luck. He hid in the upside-down version of Castle Byers, the sanctuary he had built with his brother Jonathan. Even in hell, he sought the one place that represented safety. The dimension preserved that fort perfectly, frozen on November 6th, as if recognizing Will's desperate need for somewhere familiar. But why? We'll come to that. Anyway, Joyce knew her son was alive. She heard him through the lights and felt his presence in the flickering electricity. She even painted the alphabets on the wall, and Will, from the other side, touched energy particles that corresponded to each letter. He once spelled R-U-N, warning her about the Demogorgon stalking their house. You remember the fake body in the quarry? The state tried to convince everyone that Will had drowned. They even held a funeral, but Joyce refused to accept it. As it turned out, Hawkins' lab created the corpse to cover up the dimensional breach they'd caused. Meanwhile, Will kept himself alive in impossible conditions, singing "Should I Stay or Should I Go" to maintain his sanity. The Demogorgon eventually caught him. It dragged Will to the library in the Upside Down, webbed him to a wall, and shoved a tendril down his throat. Somehow it was using Will as an incubator, planting something inside him that would come out later. Will wasn't just a victim, his body became a bridge between Hawkins and the Upside Down. Here's where we bring in the Joyce and Hopper duo. They broke through to rescue Will, finding him webbed, pale, barely breathing, with that tendril still inside his body. Hopper pulled it out, and for a while it looked like they'd arrived too late. Then Will's eyes opened. They brought him back to Hawkins, rushed him to the hospital, and he woke up surrounded by the party. But while everyone thought it was a happy ending, Will coughed up a slug in the bathroom sink and saw the upside-down flicker around him. Yep, his ordeal had just begun. The slug he vomited was a polyweeg, the baby stage of a demogorgon. It was planted inside him during captivity, of course, by that tendril. His connection to that dimension, to the hive mind that controlled it, was never actually severed. He just became a living antenna, capable of sensing the Upside Down's presence across reality. School became torture. Kids called him Zombie Boy, mocking his resurrection. Will experienced episodes where he'd freeze, transported mentally back to that nightmare dimension, and see a massive shadow creature just able his head. That shadow creature was the Mind Flayer, and it targeted him specifically in 1984 because it remembered him from his time in its domain. When Will tried standing his ground against it, especially after that terrible advice from Bob Newby, the creature didn't flee. In fact, it swarmed into him and invaded his body. You remember when I said the Upside Down specifically had Will's safety shed? Well, it was because it wanted to preserve Will. It needed him for something huge. It needed Will to become the Mind Flayer's agent inside Hawkins. Yep, that's how Spy Will happened. And trust me, this version of Will become too good at his evil job. He liked cold temperatures, just like in the Upside Down. He drew maps of tunnels he'd never seen. He lost memories and forgot people he loved. When the soldiers tried burning those tunnels, he collapsed in agony because he felt what the hive mind felt. Joyce and the gang realized they had to do something like an exorcism to remove that monster from him, so how did they do it? Well, they cranked the heat up until the monster fled in black smoke. His veins turned black as he screamed, and at some point Joyce nearly strangled him. Luckily, he became himself again. Now, at this point, you'll think it's all over, that Will was finally free of all ties with the Upside Down. Allow me to burst your bubble. The connection was not fully severed. This was when the neck tingle thing started, and Season 3 brought it back when the Mind Flayer used Billy Hargrove. Season 4 triggered it when Vecna opened gates across town. In Season 5, Will also had the tingles, and he could see through the eyes of the Demogorgons. At some point, he could feel Vecna's intentions. But let's go back a bit. Halloween, 1984, Will just wanted to go trick-or-treating with his friends while dressed as Ghostbusters. Joyce let him go despite her protective instincts screaming otherwise. The night seemed fine until bullies jumped out, Will fell, and the episode hit. He saw a shadow in the sky, and this was the first time the Mind Flayer revealed itself. Will told Mike he felt stuck between two worlds, unable to fully exist in either. Mike promised to help, but that promise became increasingly difficult to keep. You remember Bob Newby's terrible advice? He actually meant well when he told Will to face his fears. However, he didn't understand what Will was facing. Anyway, the possession happened on the school field. The shadow monster descended from the sky, swirling around Will before surging into his body through every opening until he collapsed. When he woke, the Mind Flayer had taken control and turned Will into its primary host. You know the story from here. Now let's go to summer 1985. Will had survived possession, helped close the gate, and earned the right to just be a teenager. Instead, Mike and Lucas got obsessed over their girlfriends. Max and Eleven spent all their time together. Dustin came back from camp talking about Susie. But Will? He's all alone. The D&D campaign explosion showed us just how badly Will needed things to stay the same. He set up the game, prepared the adventure, got excited about recapturing what they'd shared before the monsters ruined everything. Mike and Lucas barely paid attention, making jokes, complaining about spending time away from their girlfriends. Will finally snapped, accused them of ruining the party, and stormed out. Mike yelled, "It's not my fault you don't like girls," a line that cut deeper than intended. Yep, that was when we realized Will was gay. Anyway, he went home and destroyed Castle Byers. This meant the death of his childhood, and while his friends were moving on, he wasn't. But what else could make that night bad for him? The neck tingle returned that night, pulling Will to realize that the Mind Flayer was back. Even while his world collapsed, his responsibility to warn others took control. He became the party's alarm for interdimensional threats, and this defined his story arc in seasons 3 and 4. Moving to California after the Battle of Starcourt Mall removed Will even further from his support system. Joyce decided Hawkins was too dangerous and too full of painful memories. They relocated to Lenora Hills with 11, leaving behind Mike, Lucas, Dustin, and everything familiar. The painting became his outlet. Will spent months working on it, creating a D&D scene showing the party fighting a dragon with Mike as the leader, the Heart. He wrapped it carefully, refused to show anyone, and waited for Mike to visit during spring break. That painting contained everything Will couldn't say out loud, including his feelings for Mike. However, Mike's visit went poorly. 11 got bullied at the roller rink. The military showed up hunting her. The California crew fled in Argyle's pizza van, and Will spent the entire trip third wheeling while Mike focused entirely on 11. The painting stayed wrapped. Season 5. Volume 1 finally made Will an active participant rather than a victim or detector. The neck tingle had evolved. He could tap into the hive mind, see through its eyes, and perceive Vecna's plans. Robin helped him focus his ability as a radio receiver that needed proximity to get clear signals instead of static. Will entered trances in the woods, seeing through Holly Wheeler's eyes, while Vecna held her captive. He felt demogorgons moving through Hawkins and tracked their locations. For the first time since his abduction, Will's connection to darkness became an asset he controlled rather than a weakness against him. And of course, there's that moment. Demogorgons were about to attack Robin, Mike, and Lucas. Just then, something snapped. Will stood up. His eyes turned completely white, and he raised his hand. As the Demogorgons froze midair, he twisted his wrist and their bones cracked. He crushed them with his mind the exact same way Vecna does with his victims. Will Byers had powers. Real telekinetic abilities, not just sensitivity to the hive mind. He could control creatures connected to the Upside Down, break them from within, and weaponize the connection that had terrorized him for years. The Duffer Brothers confirmed that his powers are proximity-based. He needs to be near the hive mind signals to tap into them. He is not generating psychic force from within like Eleven or Vecna. He's just harnessing existing power, borrowing from the network, and manipulating what was already there. Will's eyes turning white like Vecna's means they get their powers from the same source. They share the same psychic DNA, infected by the same ancient force, tied to the same hive mind. So, it begs the question, what exactly does Vecna need Will for? Vecna doesn't just want Will dead, he wants Will. That distinction matters more than anything else happening in Season 5. Henry Creel could eliminate Will easily, snap his bones, steal his consciousness, and throw him into the Upside Down permanently. Instead, he keeps Will alive, marks him, speaks to him, calls him the First. That obsession reveals something important about Vecna's plans and Will's importance to them. Will was the first human Vecna abducted after becoming the monster, the first host for the Mind Flayer, and the first possession that required exorcism. This makes him valuable as a blueprint. Vecna learned from possessing Will in Season 2. He studied his resistance, mapped his vulnerabilities, and used that to refine his approach with the next victims. Billy fell faster because Vecna knew Will's weaknesses. The flayed citizens of Hawkins got consumed more efficiently because Vecna had practiced on Will. Now the Duffer Brothers drew a line between Henry's childhood trauma and Will's. Both boys fell into Dimension X. Both encountered the shadow particles. Both came back changed. The difference is just that Henry embraced the darkness and became Vecna. On the other hand, Will resisted, got rescued, and maintained his humanity. That makes him dangerous to Vecna's plans, a living proof that humans can actually survive a contact with the Upside Down. The theory fans are hopping onto is that Vecna wants Will as his successor or apprentice. Henry initially tried recruiting 11 at Hawkins' lab, mentoring her, showing her how to embrace power without guilt. That recruitment failed when 11 chose her humanity over Henry's vision. Now Vecna has a second chance with someone even more compatible, Will. But then, the fact that Will needs to stay close to the Upside Down to use his powers creates a trap. Not for Vecna, but for Will. Hawkins is already saturated with gates to the Upside Down, creatures roaming freely, and the barrier between the two dimensions nearly collapsed. He's surrounded by the very thing that gives him power, which means he's constantly exposed to Vecna's reach. Vecna's plan to kidnap 12 children and use them as vessels for the Mind Flayer is linked to his history with Will. He learned from Will's possession that children make better hosts than adults. Their minds are more flexible and their resistance are less developed. All 12 kids Vecna targeted in Season 5 Volume 1 are weak in his eyes and can easily be controlled. Will developing powers that are similar to Vecna's abilities creates another problem. If Will can control the hive mind, can crush demogorgons with his thoughts, and manipulate the Upside Down's creatures, then he is also capable of everything Vecna does. Opening gates, possessing victims, reshaping the dimension. The potential for corruption is crazy. One bad day, one moment of despair, one instant where Will stops fighting and gives in, that's all Vecna needs to turn Will from weapon into avatar. Back to his failed love story. Will's hidden feelings for Mike create emotional vulnerability Vecna can exploit. Vecna targets people through their trauma, their guilt, or their unspoken pain. Will carries all of that, unrequited love, fear of rejection, and years of hiding his true self. If Vecna wanted to break Will completely, all he'd need to do is force him to confess those feelings publicly and turn his deepest secret into his greatest weakness. The fact that Will's powers came while protecting Mike hints that emotions trigger his abilities. Robin's speech about accepting yourself, combined with the threat to someone Will loves, created the perfect storm for manifestation. Vecna might try recreating those conditions deliberately. He just needs to put Mike in danger, force Will to use his powers, and push him closer to the darkness with every life or death choice. Will could destroy the Upside Down, and at the same time, he could be the beginning of something worse. We'll find out in Season 5, Volume 2.